Hello, podcast lovers. Thank you so much for tuning back in. I'm your host, Jana, and today I have a wonderful guest. We have met each other on an amazing seminar, and we resonated on so many spiritual things together. And, when James agreed to be my guest today. I was very happy because, not only is he a fantastic teacher that helped so many children to just burst out of their own comfort zone and actually see what a great creation they are. But I feel like you yourself. So first of all, welcome, James. You yourself, before I dive into it right away, I'm so thankful that you're here because I really feel like that your soul is so warm and you're such
Mm.
a friendly, calm, wonderful human being. And I'm so happy that we get to do this because we had so many private conversations about kind of like this topic that we want to dive into, and transformational mindsets, right? Like that's like really big for people, and we decided we want to kind of hone on that, give some examples. James had read a fantastic article that I think would be really helpful to kind of like touch base on how mindsets really fall, how powerful it is when you do make a change. And yeah, let's dive in. Welcome, thank you so much for being here.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me to come into this space and share it
Of
with you
course.
and your listeners.
Of course. So, I was always so fascinated when we talk about mindset change and just like transitioning from one thinking to another. I feel like, and I would love to hear your opinion about that, but I feel like that really starts from the very first moment you are being born and you're being brought home to your caregivers. And, that could be really anybody in your life that takes on that journey with you as a caregiver. And I feel like it really starts there where we get embedded in so many principles, rituals, ideas, specific type of religion, perhaps, or just really mindset understandings of you know, whatever our caregivers tell us. Of course, we trust because who else to trust, right? Like what else is it that we can do in this moment? But I found that later on in life, when you do grow up and you start to live your own life, that a few things are not anymore resonating as much as they used to when I was smaller. And how was that for you? Like, what is really maybe something where you're like, okay, when I grew up, this was something completely that I like thought this is correct, but then today, it's I can't even identify myself with that anymore.
That's a great question. It's a big one, but I
Yeah.
definitely have that experience. And in my case, the first thing I'm thinking of is the area of religion. Uh,
Hmm.
when I was growing up, I was raised Catholic. Um, in our household, it wasn't really much of a feature in our daily lives. We would say grace before meals and we went to mass every Sunday. But
Hmm.
outside of that, like it wasn't like we talked about it or shared it. It wasn't like woven into our daily lives in our home. But from a youngest age, I still felt a very strong pull towards spirituality. And
Hmm.
so even as a child, when I would, because I did not go to Catholic schools, I would have to go to catechism classes outside of school hours.
Hmm.
And I wanted to be a really good student of my faith. And so I always had this deep-seated desire to like really give myself over to spirituality. And I always wanted to learn more. And I was frustrated a bit growing up because those catechism classes, at least when I went through them, they were taught by old lady volunteers who were well-meaning, but they didn't know that much, and I like wanted to know I wanted to get deep into it. So that was always frustrating. So I was always wanting to know more. And I went through, as I got older, I went through periods where I really dove deep into trying to learn about Catholicism. I have, who still to this day, a good friend who's a priest, and really, really devoted myself to my faith for many years. I taught at a Catholic school when I was teaching, and we had a principal who was not doing things she should have been doing, and doing things she shouldn't have been doing. And so
Hmm.
several of us on the staff went about trying to have her removed so that we could preserve the school. And
Right.
we were treated the way many people have been treated by the Catholic Church when they have confronted the church with its own shortcomings, which was, we were all told to get out, and the church circled the wagons and protected the powers that be. And
Hmm.
that left such a bitter taste in my mouth that I didn't give up on spirituality, but I realized then, like, the limitations of an organized religion institution and
Hmm.
what their priorities were, which is to preserve the institution and not necessarily to actually be the best representatives of what they supposedly were teaching, the teachings of Christ. Uh,
Hmm.
so I started a quest at that point to find a spirituality that worked for me.
Right.
And I started reading all kinds of books about spirituality, some specific to maybe a religion. I was always throughout my life, drawn to like Eastern philosophies like Buddhism and Taoism and things of that nature. And I really found sort of that was where that felt like it fit much better. Not that I practiced those things, but I realized that spirituality is a much more universal way of approaching the big ideas of God and the universe and how we can all fit in there, and still have all those things that organized religions talk about, like compassion for your fellow man, fellow woman. Um, and the thing that seemed to separate it too from like some of the organized, especially Christianity for me, was a lot of times Christianity is based on this idea that we are fundamentally flawed from the moment of conception, and we're unworthy of God's love. And that always didn't quite sit right with me. And so through this exploration I went through, that also shifted. And I realized, like, I don't think that's right at all. I think God loves everybody. I mean,
Hmm.
we're told we're all creations of God. So why would God condemn any of us for being the
Right.
way we were made, you know? So this is a
Hmm.
long answer to your question, but that is definitely, I think, the most important journey in my life, because I think one spirituality, to have a core that of a spiritual life that works for you,
Right.
um, is essential to living a life that's meaningful.
And and I personally found that when I went on my own journey, because for me in my life, I always believed in God. Like God was presented to me from the moment I was born, but as well as other things, that again, everything that you described would not fit in the normal way of going to church every Sunday. I grew up around coffee cup readings. I grew up around tarot readings. I grew up around people just telling you what they see for whomever or what's coming up, people that had visions, people that, seen people on the other side. And, I, for me, that was all normal, right? Like I grew up in this environment thinking, oh, everybody has an aunt that talks to dead people, or like everybody does these things that seem to be, where I would be exposed to at times or whatnot, but the same way, my mom always spoke to me about God and the angel and his son and the whole setup, like where is he coming from and what he did on, here, like really the same story that I would always hear when I would go to church here too. And
Hmm.
for me, spirituality really became something where I did not want it to miss out on so many beautiful things that other religions had. Like
Yeah,
there's so many
absolutely.
beautiful things in Buddhism and in being a Muslim and in being so many different categories of a religion that I
Mhm.
didn't want it to miss out on any of that. I wanted to have all the great things that so resonated with me, and I incorporated it in my own life because when I was growing up I had a lot of Muslim friends, a lot, and when they would have that time of the year where they're not allowed to eat until the sun doesn't go down,
Yeah.
I would participate in that for the
Wow.
entire time because they're my friends. Like I don't want to, I want to do what they're doing. I want to experience what they experience, and so growing up, I did not feel necessarily the pressure from my parents, at least, that I have to be this or that,
Mm.
because my dad had a completely different opinion about all of that. So, I didn't feel like that there was necessarily a choice that I would have to put myself into a category. But I feel like spirituality can be literally anything for anybody that makes them feel centered within themselves. It could be spiritual just to take a walk on the beach. It could be spiritual for somebody to literally just really have a half hour and read a book in peace, you
Hmm.
know, or just lay in the bathtub for an hour,
Yeah.
and I feel like when we're talking about changing mindsets and just transitioning from one thing to the other, I think what's really challenging at times is when you get embedded in a certain way of being or of behaving, or that's how it has to be, and then you take that in your life and then you move on with that, but then you feel in here that it doesn't make sense anymore. And I feel like that's really such a big challenge to understand, that you have the allowance within yourself, that you really are having that birth given right within you to be like, you know what, I respect that, but I don't have to be that no more. Like, and that could be in anything, it could be a tragedy that had happened, a traumatic experience. I'm not saying it's not difficult to experience that, but I am saying that through that, you can now take the broken pieces and put the broken pieces in the right order to build something completely new. And even if it's broken, maybe even leave pieces out that don't make sense at all anymore. So that rebuilding is hard because I personally had to rebuild myself a few times, and so that's really tough to pick up your own pieces and your emotional brokenness, and to really be like, you know what, my life will not be this way ever again, how I knew it wants to be, how it once was. But it's kind of also like a really nice thing when you after you go through it, not in the middle of
Yes.
it.
Yeah, not while you're
It
doing
really
it. Yeah.
sucks. Right, so I feel like that's something that's really challenging to remember, right, when we are in this really challenging phase of like, man, I this doesn't feel right with me, this doesn't sit well with me, I don't like this anymore. um but how do I break out of that? Like, how can I really find the strength to just break out of it and actually allow myself to recreate or rebirth myself into something or a situation?
Yeah, I completely relate with that because I went through a period about not quite 10 years ago where within one 12-month period, I mentioned the way the teaching thing came to an
Mhm.
end. That was really nasty and really hurtful. At the same time, my marriage was falling apart. My now ex-wife was struggling with some mental illness issues, and that was really painful.
Sure.
And then my father died in the middle of all that. So I just, everything fell apart. And
Mhm.
I knew that enough that it was going to take a while to just resurface from that. So I didn't try to make any changes during that period because I knew enough that, human beings need, I think they say it's like at least 2 years to like fully process grief after a major loss. And here I had three
Hmm.
of them, one after the other. So I
Yeah.
just thought I'm just going to let myself, I'm not going to try to do anything. Um, but once I got back to sort of a level ground, which took about 3 years, then
Hmm.
I was lucky enough to be able to see it as an opportunity to rebuild and
Hmm.
examine how did I get here? Um, what do I want moving forward? And
Right.
based on those answers, like what needs to change? And it was really, then it became quite lovely to be able to, for the first time in my life,
Hmm.
consciously make these choices. Because I
Hmm.
started out talking, everything else in my life had been done just sort of without thinking and without
Right.
really questioning why I was doing much of anything. Um, they were just things that had been handed down or societal things like, oh, I'm done with school. Now I do this step and then I get married and then I do this. And this was an opportunity to really question, do I want this in my life? Do I want that
Hmm.
in my life? And if so,
Hmm.
what do I need to do to start putting those pieces in place? And
Hmm.
so it's been not quite 10 years, but it's been the most rewarding almost 10 years of my life
Yeah.
because I'm actually constructing a life of my own making.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Congratulations, first of all,
Thank
really
you.
congratulations, because this is not easy. It's really not
No.
easy, because not to say when we tap into these made molds, regardless of where they come from, they get embedded in us or societal, it doesn't matter. But when we tap into them, we have good times too. It feels safe. We build a
Yes.
safety net. We build comfort zone. We build like, okay, this is good. I'm not the everyday all day happy, but I'm all right, kind of thing. And 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 then we have these assumption like, well, who's happy every day all day? Like that doesn't exist. But I feel like also the same way we have the opportunity to rebuild, we also then have the opportunity to kind of like push things or people, places, situations out and be like, you know what,
Mhm.
this simply does not resonate with me anymore, or this relation that I have with this friend, with this neighbor, with whoever, just we don't vibe anymore the same way. We're not on the same vibrational level, and it just doesn't feel good anymore. But I feel like when you yourself really acknowledge that you are your own project. Like
Mhm.
you really are your own biggest project in this entire existence of a human life. And I feel like when I started to really incorporate my spirituality into my rebuilding and my rebirth journey, it became lighter. I'm not
Uh,
saying it was always easy, but it just became really lighter because I fundamentally got so rooted in the belief that no matter what, and no matter what, I always will be protected.
mm,
Like no matter what is going to happen, I always will be fine in the end, because I am here for the right reasons. And my
mm.
heart is for the right reasons, doing what I'm doing. And I feel like when we talk about exiting a long-term relationship, that's a whole nother thing, because I feel like with you just deciding that this is something that is not possible anymore, I feel like you really displayed self-love to yourself a whole lot too, because we are allowed to love ourselves enough to be like that this person is so, in a sense, eating up our energy and eating up our happiness, because we constantly want to do things for them. We constantly want to be there, that we're doing that we're losing ourselves in it. Right. And I feel like when we gain back that strength and that power to be like, you know what, I matter also. If, in fact, I matter the most,
Yes.
to
And
myself at least.
yeah. And I think
Without, mhm. Go ahead. So sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think that is the fundamental place we need to arrive at in order
Mhm,
to start to make these transformational changes.
mhm,
Because, growing up, most of us are not brought up being told those things, like you're super special and you should be, I'm going to help you as your parent or some loving figure in your life to pay attention to the things that arise from your heart and your soul that call to you. Who's raised like that?
right.
Not very many people. And we're often raised with criticism and, being told we're not doing something right, we're not doing something good. And so I think that love for oneself and that ability to follow one's heart
Mhm,
is kind of beaten out of us to a certain extent at a very young age. And that's why we end up in all of these situations, whether it's relationships or jobs or friendships or
mhm,
that are not really nurturing us.
mhm,
We've been sort of conditioned, as you talked about before, things were conditioned to believe like this is life, you know,
right.
and people who, since that's most of us, people who do finally get to some point where they realize this isn't working for me, at the core of that is this seed of I'm not happy and I want to be and I deserve to be. And that's where just that little seed can begin to grow. And then we,
Mhm,
you know, start to look around and maybe make changes or at least seek information like a book or a therapist or somebody who
right.
can help to validate, like, yeah, you have a right to be happy. You have a right to pursue the things that light you up. And
Mhm.
that's ultimately going to serve not only you, but the world far better than you suffering through some job or relationship that's making you miserable.
Right. Yeah, and I also feel like, that part of feeling miserable or feeling that something is off, but yet not having the strength to break out of that because again, there's so many ties, right? That could play a role in that. There could be financial ties, there could be children, there could be,
Mhm.
I don't know, verbal agreements, there could be whatever it might be, or it could be just as simple as telling yourself, well, this is my soulmate, you know this is my soulmate because I was there. This is my soulmate. Like I know everything about this person. I know everything about this person. I invested time, I invested strength, love, my soul, my heart, my mind, my body, my everything was invested, and I could not imagine under no circumstances to ever not be with this human. And I literally took it rather that I suffered internally instead of facing the truth that
Yeah.
I'm not happy.
Mhm.
And that's really where for me it took me a long time to really give myself the allowance to just really be like, you know what, I'm not okay, I'm not happy at all. And I'm not saying I wasn't happy just because of certain things that had happened in this particular scenario. I wasn't happy because internally with myself I wasn't happy. I didn't pay attention to myself, I didn't listen to my tempo, I didn't do the things I used to love to do, like just sitting in a cafe for a glass of wine, just strolling down window shopping. Window shopping is my jam. Like I almost enjoy that more than actually buying something because I don't know, I
Yeah.
just love to take my time and all of that. So, and I was noticing I wouldn't do those things anymore, but when I then
Mm.
honed in on my journey of really asking myself deeper questions, remembering the child I used to be, the things I
Mhm.
used to love to do, and the way I used to laugh with my friends. Like, where is that girl? Where did she go? Is she still here? Did she what?
Yes.
And I asked myself really painful questions. And more importantly, and I'm sure you did too, just giving yourself your own answer. which
Yeah.
already lingers in here, but you're actually telling yourself out loud, okay, this, dang, like this is true. What I feel is exactly what I think.
Right, right. Yeah, I know for me along those lines, one of the first elements that started to shift for me was when I was growing up, I was a very quiet kid. I don't know if I'd say I was shy, but I'm very introverted.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I love having like deep, in-depth conversations like we're having now. But I
Mm-hmm.
still to this day, I'm not one for just small talk. And so, and yet I'm very happy to be sort of self-contained and quiet and reading a book or drawing a picture, whatever. And growing up, when I would be around, especially adults, that kind of, they didn't know what to do with that. I think it made them uncomfortable that I was quiet and not running around causing a ruckus or something. And so
Right.
I would constantly get these comments like, why are you so quiet? How come you're sitting in the corner by yourself? Like all these things that were telling me there was something wrong with me being the way I was. And so
Right.
I pretty quickly became convinced that there was something wrong with me, even though I really liked that part of myself. I like those parts of myself. But so few people around me appreciated those things. They always saw them as flaws of some sort. So I grew
Mm-hmm.
up with that belief and spent decades of my life like that. So during this transformational period, that was one of the first things, and I'm sure I read it in one of the books that I was using at the time, was embracing those parts of yourself that you've been taught to believe are flawed. And because like when I would think back, it's like I was perfectly fine with myself being the way I was. I didn't see it as a problem. It wasn't causing me pain, wasn't causing
Mm-hmm.
me discomfort. And so I said, just started to just embrace all those parts of myself that I had been told were not okay. And that was like a good beginning point because it was so personal, you know,
Right.
to
Yeah.
look at those parts of myself and say, so what if I'm quiet when I'm in certain situations? Like if people don't like it, like that's their issue, not mine,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
That
know?
self-confidence that wasn't there at the time, because
Oh,
where can it come from as a child, you know?
exactly, exactly.
Yeah, but also I feel like that suppressing aspect of it. Not only did you now believe that there must be wrong something with you, but you suppress now your
Hmm.
that part of you, which I think is really causing the real issue. Because once you really are suppressing what you are really are, or what you feel really comfortable in expressing yourself with, that's really when you live a miserable life, like in any kind of aspect, it could be, and we can put that to any topic in the world:
Yep.
fashion, gender, religion, it doesn't matter. Like if you are not really able, because of certain aspects that are kind of like hindering you or not giving you the allowance to really do that, then it's really tough, I think, to really be like, well, I'm just going to be who I am. Yeah, no, like you can't, because you might even get real deep consequences from being really what you
Yeah.
think or truly feel you want to be, just like yeah, I feel like that's such a great segue into just really talking about things where, just because we think certain things have to be the same way because it got really told to us or displayed to us, it's just so powerful when you are actually taking the time to really just do your own research on it. Like whenever your conscious mind is so developed that it really tells you, and even if it's just such a little tiny voice inside of you that and that keeps popping up, like, hey, do you like that? Like, is this cool? Really? Like, and you kind of whatever, without having dialogue with anybody about that, but just you and you, and then to go and do that research,
Yeah.
like what is really this aspect about? What is really this whole subject about? Like, does this really sit well with me? And I think that that article that you read, I'm so fascinated. I was so fascinated about that. And I want us to touch base on that because that's such a fantastic example of how one human had the power of his mind to allow himself to see something or to explore something that was so taboo, right? Like
Yeah.
it was not allowed, it was not okay, it was absolutely taboo, but yet here he is, this human,
Hmm.
and I want you to share the story, um, taking charge and be like, you know what? Okay, I can still feel the same way I felt before. I can still go back to that, but you know what? Let me take a quick detour. Let me let me research this a little and let me see, how I like that. But yeah, please share the story because I was fascinated with the article.
Sure. So I read about this man, and then I wrote an essay about what his journey. His name is Daryl Davis, and I've seen him and heard him interviewed like on major news shows and stuff like that too. But he's a black man, and he lived in the South. He may still live in the American South. And, obviously in American history, that was the hotbed of slavery in our history. And so a lot of those racist attitudes are still alive in certain people, and not just in the South, but there is sort of a legacy in the American South of this white supremacy.
Hmm.
And that also fed into the creation of the organization, the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, which was, again, devoted to the idea of white supremacy and separation of races and hatred, really, toward blacks. And
Hmm.
there are still, unfortunately, active segments of that culture. So Daryl
Yeah.
Davis, and this was all like in the last couple of decades. Daryl Davis just sort of wondered to himself, like, how can anybody hate me, a black man, simply because I'm colored the way I am when they don't know anything about me as an individual person?
Right.
So he was sort of just questioning the basis of our prejudices, in this case, racial prejudice. And so he took it upon himself, and he did this very carefully because it could be dangerous. Um, he wanted to actually sit down and have a conversation with members of the KKK on an individual basis, one at a time, just to ask them about their beliefs. How do they come about? And can we share a conversation and get to know each other a little bit better and see if that might shift our views of one another. And even before he got to that point, he did a lot of research about their history so that when he would have conversations with them, he could speak intelligently about the evolution of their organization and their beliefs. So it wasn't like he was just throwing accusations at them or anything. Like, he actually had done a lot of homework and sometimes knew things that they themselves didn't know about the history of their organization. So he
Hmm.
finally arranges to interview uh, a gentleman who was a member of the KKK. And it was tense at first.
Right.
And the member of the KKK was like not really sure what was going on here. Like, why do you want to talk to me? And um, so Daryl Davis explained, this is, what I'm up to. And they ended up having this conversation, and it was not comfortable, but they managed their way through it, and they had a civil conversation. And the member of the Klan was actually quite impressed that Mr. Davis had bothered to do this homework, and which to learn about their organization and their beliefs and where they came from. And so the Klansmen, thought, "Well, that's respectable. He actually took some time to learn about us." And
Right.
that caused a little crack, of light to come through and made it possible to have a little deeper conversation. And these conversations would continue, over several sessions. And in some of the cases, after having conversations with Mr. Davis, these Klansmen would come to realize that there was no reason for them to have the feelings that they had toward Black people in general, and for Mr. Davis in particular, because they had now spent enough time with him to get to know him and see him differently. They could see him as an individual human and not just as a member of this group we've been told or conditioned to believe is an enemy. And in several of these cases, they would resign from the KKK, and they would, the KKK's uniform is these white robes with a white hood, and they would resign from the KKK and give him their robes. And I believe in the article I read about him, and this was several years ago, he had collected something like over 200 robes of former Klansmen who had come around to this new way of seeing, because somebody like him reached out to say, let's talk about our differences. Let's talk about why you feel like you do toward me and why I might feel like I do toward you, and do it respectfully. And and it was just, it's an amazing story of taking a step toward that which we see as something dangerous or harmful or fearful, and realizing that a lot of the times these limiting beliefs we have are rooted in nothing, or nothing that we really can relate to. It's just they've been mapped onto us maybe by the culture or the place we grew up in. And so that is the essence of that that story in that article.
Yeah. I also feel like, that it's not only what we believe in, but what we just maybe don't believe in anymore. Because I'm pretty sure there were people and things that were completely 100% convinced that this is how it should be, in whatever belief system that we're now talking about. But now that time went on and things changed and life situation changes and circumstances changes and all of that, now it's really the question of like, do I still believe that what I used to be? So I feel like that constant check-in with yourself, like really going back, because we're so prompt as humans to be so what is that English word, when you get used to something, you get used to it, and then that's what it is, and you almost forget about it, and you get almost robotic about it.
Yeah.
But if we don't do those regular check-ins with our own self and really ask ourselves, hey, is this really truly still what I believe? Like, is this really still something that absolutely makes sense, that it represents me, the character I want to be, the person that I want to be? Like, does this really is still something that I can identify myself with? And what courageous person was he? What kind of courage did that really take for himself to put himself out there, knowing that if this can succeed, this can be a breakthrough for not only his life, but many lives to come after.
Yeah.
And I think, this to me really is spirituality too, to
Absolutely.
of course wanting to do the right thing that sits the best in your own spirit and in your own soul, but also that it can benefit whoever else is maybe stuck, or maybe doesn't know how to get out, or maybe doesn't even know where to start. Because when we talk about spirituality and connecting and being rooted and grounded and all of those words, I feel like a lot of people still, they really don't even know, what does that even mean, me being rooted? Like, how, what is that? Like, I have a job, I have a home, like, okay, is that me being rooted? And so sometimes I feel like, those examples of how we allow things to really enter our life and what we really do with that, can be transformational. Like, just really a story like that, could be really nudging yourself to be like, wait, is there something that I should be thinking about today? Is, and so I think being courageous and really allowing yourself to to really do and exercise the things that really yourself inner is calling you is self-love in the end too, you know? Like,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
Something you said there just really resonated with me about, is it, I'm completely in agreement with you that I think we want to be grounded and connected to something that's meaningful. Um, but especially in America, in our modern culture,
Mm-hmm.
um, it seems like that's harder to grasp than ever because so many people, their lives are just so overly busy. Their
Yeah.
children's lives are overly busy. Their family lives are overly busy. And there is no way to feel grounded or connected when you are that busy. It's just not possible. And
Mm. There's just no time.
no, and time is
Mm-hmm.
essential. You have to take time um, to step away from all that on a regular
Right.
basis. In fact, that's what was the kind of the intention in the Jewish and Christian traditions of having a Sabbath day, a day of rest, right? Um, that
What a
was,
wonderful tradition.
yes, that was part of the intention of that. It wasn't just for worshiping their God, but it was also a day of rest and renewal to reflect and
Mm-hmm.
to become grounded because the week ahead was going to be full of work and children and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And in America, there used to be decades ago, like on Sunday, like stores would be closed, and things like that. And whether you went to church or not, shopping was just not an option that day. So you better find something else to do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a book about this called The Gift of Rest, written by a gentleman named Joseph Lieberman, who used to be a senator in
Mm-hmm.
Washington, D.C. And he was an observant Jew. And even when he was in the Senate, he observed the Sabbath every week. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and, because he was in the government, if there was some major security issue, then they could bother him. But other than that, they left him alone on the Sabbath day. And he wrote this book, The Gift of Rest, which I read years ago. I just actually ordered a new copy of it for myself, um, about reincorporating this idea of a day of rest into your life, whether you're religious or not, had nothing to do with it. He'll just say, like, this is the Jewish tradition. This is the purposes of it. These ideas of renewal and rest and reflection, connection
Mm-hmm.
with ourselves, with our family. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and he was encouraging people to find a way to incorporate these things into your life, however it works for you. And I think that is that's a huge thing for me. I would love to be able to encourage people all over the world, but especially in America right now, to start to think about this and take that
Mm-hmm.
time because so many people, they're just running all the time, and
All the time.
and that can't feel right. You've talked a lot about, does it feel right in my inside? And I don't know. I know people who live like that, and they are all exhausted and complaining about how they're so busy all the time. And it is
Mm-hmm.
within their power to make some choices to
Mm.
change that. But it
Yeah.
is also, I think, an element of courage, as you've mentioned too, because people look around, they see everybody else is doing it that way too. And so, do I really want to be the person that steps out of line and says, I'm not going to do that?
Right. That's big. That's really big because I feel like that's really almost the biggest thing that would hold somebody back to not be like the norm.
Mhm.
Because who are you if you're not like the norm? Because then we go deeper. You need to ask yourself again all those questions to even start all over at the beginning of the cycle, because once you really know who you are, which starts with these kind of situations, then it wouldn't even matter anymore. If you stand by yourself on an island and you have this opinion and you have this, what you truly believe in, it doesn't matter if 100 people stand with you or not, because you just know for you that
Yeah.
this makes sense. But it is scary. And, when we talk about people being busy and they don't have the time for themselves, is also because, they now created a lifestyle for themselves that costs are involved. So this would mean if I
Yeah.
now go down from a specific amount of hours down to another specific amount of hours, I'm losing X amount of money, which means I cannot afford A, B, and C, which is again scary because what will everybody else think of me? I don't have this or that. And
Yeah.
so I really truly feel like that it does start all in your own mind. And I feel like if you can at least take 5 minutes each day and really just try to ask, is my mind aligned with my heart? Like
Mm.
whatever I think up here, does that kind of come down here to my heart? And it doesn't have to be completely 100% aligned with everything and anything, but at least where you don't feel like this,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And maybe just take the 10 minutes drive. Everybody at one point is in a car, or everybody at one point is in a kitchen, or everybody at one point is even in the restroom. Everybody is at one point. Just take that time, even if it's just 5 minutes per day, maybe just a quick 5 minutes where it's just literally 3 deep breaths in a time-taking manner. Like really
Yeah.
just take your time, do 3 good breaths, and just know no matter what, you'll be okay no matter what. And I feel like that's really like I feel like that will be a good start. Like imagine everybody can just take 5 minutes of their day and just have those 3 good strong breaths and just really tell themselves that moment, no matter what, I'll be okay you know I
I
don't know.
love I love that. I would also encourage those 5 minutes to be spent as much as possible in silence.
Absolutely.
I think silence is so
Hmm.
powerful. And if you were to be in the habit of doing 5 minutes a day, breathing and being quiet, it wouldn't happen right away, but after a week or two, I think
Hmm.
you'd start
You
to
start to
hear
feel.
hear
Yeah,
or feel that
hmm
little thing inside of you saying, this feels right.
yeah,
And I don't want it to feel like that anymore, you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
And that's the very beginning of that little voice coming out and saying, you
Hmm.
deserve better than this. And
Yeah. And I feel like everything starts there. Everything can start to blossom from in there. But that's a great point. I feel like that's a great starting tool of like make it make it a homework. Take
yeah.
take take it as a challenge. Do it for 2 weeks, each
Mhm.
day 5 minutes in silence, 3 good strong breaths, and just really, I'll be okay. I'm
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
And then progress from there, because that's really how deep meditation comes from and starts, which is a whole nother level. But I'm saying it's a fantastic way. It's a fantastic way, because those 3 situations that we described, we all are in
Yeah.
during one whole day. Whenever we wake up till the time we go to bed, we will be for 5 minutes in those situations. So maybe
Right.
just start
Yeah.
there. Yeah, but
Yeah. Even if
I
it's
think
on their way to work, for those people that still have a drive, or,
right.
just don't turn on the radio. Let that
Yeah.
be your quiet time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This was so great. This was so wonderful. I'm so happy we did this, and I feel and I hope that through these shared examples that we can encourage ourselves,
Mhm.
to really allow us to be who we really want to be, and
Yes.
not be scared of the consequences. Instead, embrace them and be like, okay, you know what? Maybe my tower is supposed to fall down. That's okay.
Mhm. Yeah,
Maybe now that it's falling down, all the broken pieces are falling exactly in the right spot.
that's exactly right. Yeah.
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 Well, podcast lovers, here it is. As always, if you have something on your heart, if you want to be a part of this journey with me, my mic is always open to you. But until then, stay rooted, stay grounded, and always stay connected to love, the strongest force in the universe.